Sometimes the road ain't gold, it's a cold wind laughing.
Welcome to Leaving Egypt. This is a place where I share my stories and my thoughts about finding freedom from spiritual oppression. And you might be wondering, why leaving Egypt? Well, this was a huge theme that God used in my story, and I'll get to that. In the Bible, Egypt is a picture of slavery. And God led the Israelites out of Egypt into the wilderness and eventually into the promised land. It's more than just a story in the Bible. It's a picture for us today to attempt together to find freedom in this crazy world that's trying to weigh us down by the minute. I hope you find something in this podcast useful. In this first episode, I will be sharing how God led me out of my marriage. And as you listen to my story, I want you to hear what I have to say, but I also want you to be sensitive to God's voice in your situation. Just because he told me something doesn't mean he's telling you something. But I do hope that you find some liberation in what I'm saying somewhere, because, we all need each other's stories. So I'm just here to tell mine. But the main goal of this podcast is to encourage you to hear God's voice in your particular situation. So before I start each episode, I want to start off with a prayer. So here we go. Dear Jesus, I pray that everybody listening here learns to hear your voice during this time a little bit more. I pray for the same thing for me. I pray sensitivity to your spirit. I pray blessing over these words and over this story. And I just pray that you deliver truth to them in the only way that you know how to deliver truth to them. And I just pray for hearts to be opened and for every single person listening to this podcast to experience you more and more and really get to know your love for them. And that's my prayer. Amen. All right, so I want to start off with a study, actually, that I found super interesting. I've known about it for a really long time, and I'm a musician, and so that kind of plays into it. But my divorce was final, and I had moved home to be with my parents to heal, and I had a really bad case of tinnitus, and I laughed thinking, oh my gosh, that's what happens to combat veterans when they leave war, because all of the gunshots and everything, it makes your ears ring. And so I thought, I have literally just been through a spiritual, emotional war for years. No wonder I have tinnitus. So I talked to my friend, and she suggested doing sound frequency healing. So that got me intrigued, and I started Googling sound frequencies. And I started learning about the fact that certain types of music hold different frequencies. The instruments were tuned in a certain way. So I researched the most healing sound frequencies, and I found that our standard tuning for instruments is 440 hertz. And that's, pretty much that's been going on since people started recording music. So that's 440, right? Your standard music, rock, pop, anything, normal standard tuning. So then classical music is tuned to 432 hertz, which all of those instruments, they're made to be tuned to that frequency. And then you have Baroque music, which is like your Gregorian chants. All of that is tuned to 528. And it's actually called the solfeggio, I think is how you pronounce it. Sorry, I probably should have looked that up before I started this episode. But that doesn't really matter. They've done some studies on the effects of sound frequencies on our body and on health in general. Certain ones are life-promoting and certain ones are actually toxic to our bodies. So it's really interesting because basically the result of this particular one, and I'll put all of these references in the notes, that the frequency of our brain matched this 528 solfeggio frequency. I'm just going to refer to it as the 528 frequency. That's the Baroque music, the monks, the Gregorian chants, all of that. So it actually matched the frequencies of our brain, which I found fascinating. They've also linked it to the frequency that birds sing in, the frequency that bees buzz in, the frequency of nature, the frequency of lightning that comes from the earth's core. So it's everything. It's the frequency of our voice when we talk. It's everything that's natural is the frequency of 528. Or actually there's 6 frequencies that are in the solfeggio frequency list, and that's one of them. But the 528, they have found actually produces healing effects and growth effects for healthy DNA. It's really crazy. You guys should look into it. Basically, they found that it increased cell life by 20%. The classical music increased it to a small percentage, like I want to say it was 6 or 8%. And then the rock music, which is standard tuning that we listen to every day, is either not helpful, it's neutral, or it's harmful. I'm not trying to depress you here, but I'm just trying to prove the point that your environment matters. And the energy that you put into your environment matters. And I'm not just talking about music. Words hold frequency. Relationships hold frequency. People hold frequencies depending on what they've let into their body. And I'm not saying it's their fault if they have a low frequency. I'm sure I have a really low frequency at different times. It's so important what we allow into our environment. And it really does matter because some things are life-giving and some things are death-giving. So today I want to talk about this song that I just released called When the Soul Dies. And the whole song is all about how I had to choose myself and choose to protect myself because I was starting to fade. And I was starting to fade because the environment I was in, this relationship I was in, this marriage I was in, was not healthy. It was toxic. It was damaging to me and to him, because if it damages one person, it damages the other person. And so, you know, this parallel, it goes for everything. But it matters what environment you're in, and it also matters how long you're in it. So my challenge to you is, what energy are you letting in to your life? Your thoughts, your beliefs, the words you say. And if you don't know the answer to that question, take a look around and see what kind of fruit is bearing. Is life coming forward? Are you growing? Are you developing? Or are you just fading? I promise you, if you're in a relationship right now that has hurtful words, it will not bear fruit. So later on, we're going to talk about the difference between a challenging relationship and a damaging relationship and how to hopefully tell the difference, because I did not have this information when I started out. So to get into my story, my ex-husband and I, we met in college, and, you know, it was the typical party drinking phase where everybody was doing it. And I had done that in high school. And, you know, I just figured I would grow out of it. And I also didn't really let it get too out of hand. I just enjoyed people and loved being social and that kind of thing. But it's such a culture for everybody, especially in college in America and other places too. But so I didn't really think much of it, but I met him there, and he was a combat veteran. He was a little bit older than I was. So this had all happened before I met him. And so, you know, he told me his story and about how when he came back from war and the struggles he faced and everything, and the challenges that he overcame. And I felt really inspired by it. I had a lot of compassion. I had never met anybody that had fought in war. And I just know, and I've always known, that God has such beautiful plans for every single person. And his mercies are different depending on what people have gone through and what their past is. And I really felt God's heart for him. And so I decided to dive in full on into this relationship. And the further in we got, the more I realized he really was using alcohol to cope, as a lot of the combat veterans do. I had so much loyalty to him that it was almost like, looking back, I'm like, in my mind, I was married before I was married. Like, I didn't really give myself the space to consider, because I was so loyal and so compassionate and so just like passionate and driven and focused. Like, I was determined to make this work, instead of listening to God's voice saying, maybe this should be just be somebody that you keep as a friend, and maybe you don't get into a serious relationship with, and you pray for them on the side and you support them on the side. But it's a whole different thing to be immersed into relationship and into a unit with somebody that's struggling this deeply, because it can really have negative effects, as I found on me. So eventually he got a job to move around the country, every year or every 2 years with private construction company. And I was really down for that because, I love traveling, and I had already done a lot of traveling before I met him. And I thought, I'll do my music on the weekends and, work in nonprofit work with kids, doing programming and different things. And those jobs will be easy to find because they're everywhere. And that was my background. So I thought it was a win-win, and I was really open to it. As we moved, the drinking continued. That culture stayed the same, because a lot of the guys working in the field were, kind of like military guys, military culture, where a lot of young men and single men, and they're partying and just having a good time. And what I learned was addiction and different substances, they have spirits. They have their own spirit about them and their own personality and their own tools and trickery that they use. I experienced this heavily. I witnessed it, and I experienced the receiving end of it. And what it does is first of all, alcoholism, it's a cruel spirit. It's just harsh, brash, and cruel. Other drugs, they have different personalities, but they blind you and they keep you sleeping. They keep you numb. And if they can keep you sleeping, you'll miss out on your purpose. And that's the point, because your life is a threat to them. The light that you give out, that's your God-given light to shine, is a threat. And they won't allow that to happen. So in my experience, I watched him sleep. And that was almost more painful than anything. Of course, I experienced toxic words and hurtful situations from it. And those were awful, and I'm still healing from it. But watching him sleep, metaphorically, was almost the most painful thing. Somebody that you love turning more and more and more into a ghost. And then I'm just a co-conspirator in that situation. I'm enabling that to happen. And I learned afterwards, I read this book called Codependent No More, and I learned that you are destined to become codependent after so many cycles of being on the receiving end of addiction. Because if you stay, you're sending a message. If you stay and things don't change, you're sending a message to that person that this hurts me, but it's okay. And so there's that. But, I prayed and prayed for healing, and I stayed up late just interceding and praying and believing for a miracle, believing for healing. I honestly did that since the time I really started to get to know that this was an issue. And the cycle of hurt continued, and there was never really any resolution. I'm hoping some of this can be familiar to some of you, even if it's just one person experiencing this out there. I hope that this might shed some light on your situation. The phrase, marriage is supposed to be challenging. I heard that all the time. And that can be such a confusing statement because nobody really teaches you the difference between challenging and damaging. You just think if it's hard, it's supposed to be hard. And this is what I'm supposed to be going through because everybody has their issues, right? If there's anything I've learned, it's the difference between challenging and damaging relationships. Challenging will bring about growth and resilience. Damage will just break your spirit down. It keeps you in the state of injury where you're never fully recovering. You're always in survival mode. You're always wondering when the next shoe is going to drop. And so when I was writing out this podcast, I looked up the definition for the word damage, and it is damage by definition means to cause physical harm to something as to impair its value, usefulness, or normal function. That's so sad. To impair its value, what we were created to be, usefulness, what we were created to do, and normal function, just who we were, our original design, what we were supposed to be. So damage ruins all of that. And that's what my song talks about, when the soul dies. That's what that is. Because if you stay in something too long, you can lose yourself. And I'm telling you, the longer you stay in something, the harder it will be to find yourself again. It's common for people to not condone divorce if there's been physical abuse. But what about verbal abuse? Verbal abuse, and that's such a stigma. You know, there was a long time where I was like, I don't even want to use the word abuse because I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I didn't want to hurt his family. You know, it's such a harsh word, but what I experienced was harsh. I'm telling my story because I have to for other people out there. Half of the issue is that I didn't have the boldness to see it for what it was in the first place. What's interesting about verbal abuse is it actually causes physical damage to your brain. Trauma brain. Anybody experienced that? So, you know, even on good days when you're not fighting with your person, if you're in a verbally abusive relationship, you're still going to be in survival mode, like I said. So I actually ended up going to school once my divorce was finalized. I went to school to get my second degree in holistic nutrition consulting because one of the other struggles I've had since I was like 19 was autoimmune illness, and doctors just couldn't figure it out. Could not figure out what it was. And so I had to do a lot of reading and research to figure out things that would help my body. So eventually I learned so much that I did see some changes and some really amazing changes. And God brought me through so much with that. And so I wanted to help other people legally. So I got this degree. And one of the things I learned in this program was you have your parasympathetic nervous system and you have your sympathetic nervous system. When you are in survival mode, in an emotionally damaging relationship, where you're just waiting for the next shoe to drop, there's never actual resolution, and you're not really sure if you're safe emotionally or physically. Your body is constantly in that fight or flight mode, which activates your adrenals. And your adrenals are really only supposed to be used originally, like think of the cavemen. They're fighting off a bear or a wolf comes into their camp. They're supposed to use that for fight or flight for extreme emergencies. It's not supposed to be used every day. It's not supposed to be used every minute, you know, but your body in that phase is in what's called the sympathetic nervous system. And when your sympathetic nervous system is activated all the time, you can't tap into your parasympathetic, which is used for digestion, immune function. It's for rest and digest. They call it the rest and digest with the parasympathetic. And you need it to repair your body, to heal, to recover. So you're never really able to recover. Therefore, it just creates damage after damage after damage. It's not about your inability to forgive, okay? Like, this is actually physical. You can't withstand it for much longer. That's just something to remember, to give some context to like words and what words can do to your body and what damaging relationships can really do to your body. It can truly just make you ill over time. Really can. And so to continue my story, I asked God, for a while whether I should stay or go. I said, I'll stay if you want me to stay, and I'll go if you want me to go. So for the longest time, he just said, wait and pray, wait and pray. So I did, waited and prayed. And because the thing is that I really knew that God could heal him. I really knew. I mean, I've seen people with redemptive stories with their broken marriages and they find healing. I've seen this happen. I know God's capable of doing this. I know people are capable of changing. And I still believe that to this day. So I believed that God would heal if he could be healed. And so that was the message I got. So I said, okay, I will absolutely stay no matter how long, because I'm here for the story. I'm here to see what you can do in my life. No matter which way you take it, I know it's going to be amazing. So it's just a matter of whatever you want me to do. So I stayed. And then one night we had a really bad fight. There had been drinking and he had said some really terrible things. And I, in my gut, just felt these words in all caps, in lowercase, never again. And I felt it in my stomach pop up, just appear. And I was like, never again. Like, I will never hear these words again. And so I went into the guest bedroom and I slept, and I didn't sleep. So I couldn't sleep. So I went downstairs and I started writing a song, and I was just praying to God. Like, I feel like there's a shift like this. I cannot keep doing this. And this is what was starting to brew inside of me. But I was like, but God, I want to know that it's you speaking to me, and I need a confirmation. So I said, will you give me a dream? And I hadn't gotten very many God dreams. I had a few in the prior years, but it wasn't really until this point on that I started getting dreams after dreams after dreams. So I couldn't sleep, so I didn't get a dream that night. But he came downstairs and checked on me and said, I got a dream. And I said, I've been praying for a dream. What was it? And he said, we were in Egypt. We were in a pyramid and we were eating around a table. We had friends and some family, and everybody was eating and drinking, and your seat was empty. You weren't there, and I missed you. And so I went out to look for you and try to find you and bring you back because you belonged with me and I missed you. And I knew it was important, this dream. So I said, I'm going to call my grandma tomorrow and ask her what the meaning of Egypt is in the Bible. She knows a lot about the Bible, and she's just got this incredible relationship with God. So I called my grandma the next day, and I didn't tell her anything that happened. I just wanted to know about Egypt. And she said, honey, that's a symbol for slavery in the Bible. It's a symbol for oppression. And I knew immediately that this was God's message. If things do not change, she will be gone. So this started everything. The next day, he goes to work and comes home and said, I know it means I'm supposed to stop drinking. So I got so excited. This was the first time I'd ever heard this. And right before that, I had told him, I'm done. I can't do this anymore, because that was the resolve I had figured out that day while he was at work. And then he came home and said this, and I'm like, okay, I'll stay. In that case, I will stay. I will do this. Let's do this. I'm here to support you all the way. Like, this is what God was planning on doing. This is amazing. But I also knew what God had showed and put on my heart, the never again. So I said, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And he said, whatever you want to do. So I said, I want to stay. So I stayed. And about 3 months later, I realized that he wasn't quitting or wasn't able to quit by himself, or that me being in the equation was not helping. I think it comforted him, but it didn't help the situation. I think I was a crutch in that equation. And I felt that really strong. And so I eventually decided to leave. I knew that would be the only thing that would propel him to change. But it really wasn't so much about that as much as it was about me needing to heal and me needing to just rest. And so I left. It was terrible. And my dad helped me pack up my stuff. So we were in West Virginia at the time, and he came out and stayed in a hotel while I packed up my stuff. And later on, I'll share some really cool things that God did in my dad's life during this story. Because when God does one thing, he ripples, and the ripple effect happens. So as we were leaving West Virginia, we were maybe about 45 minutes outside of the town that I was living in. There was a sign that we passed that said, "You are now leaving Egypt." There was a nature preserve that we just drove through that was called Egypt. And it blew me away. I could just feel God's closeness and his hand on this. And I was a mess. Like, I'm surprised I even looked up to see through my tears. My poor dad. Like 7 days of that in the car. Me just going through every scenario, every future scenario, and just the full thing. And in the end, I just knew I was making the right choice. Another way I knew is because we got to our hotel room that night, and Joel Osteen was already on the TV before. We didn't even turn it on. It was just on when we got there. And he said, "You are leaving Egypt. You're going to the promised land." And I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. This is amazing how close he is. But that's how many signs and confirmations I needed. And God knew that because he's so kind. Like, I was in such a warfare to make that kind of decision over my life. I wasn't qualified to know what the future held. That's why I clung so tightly to God. And every 2 seconds I was changing my mind, thinking I was making the wrong choice. I mean, it was just awful. So anybody that's gone through divorce probably can relate. But I did, because of all these confirmations and signs that God gave me, and this is just scratching the surface, you guys. He has given me so many and gave me so many during this time. He just covered me. And what it did was give me a blanket of peace in the midst of all of this chaos, because I could hear his voice. And sometimes we think that we have to make space for God, and we do have to make space and time to hear God's voice and make a practice of that and really ask him. But just know that when you need it most, he will yell through the noise to get to you. He will insert himself. He will yell through the noise. I promise you this. So that's just a snippet of my story. I hope something in there resonated with you. The takeaway here is there's a difference between challenging and damaging. And a challenge to look at your environment. What are you letting in? And what fruit is that bearing in your life? You get to be honest with yourself. You get to ask yourself these questions. One thing a friend said to me during this time that I had never heard when I was deciding to leave or stay was you are never trapped. You're never trapped. You always have an option. God's going to be with you whether you go left or whether you go right. He will be with you. He does not leave you because you make the wrong decision. You can always change your mind. Again, you get grace. You're never trapped. And I wrote something down that I wanted to read for you guys at the end. We are all loved beyond measure by a God who will go to any length to save us and show us what a good father he is. For anyone who is in some kind of relationship that you maybe aren't sure if it's healthy or not, try asking God to speak to you. Be bold and just ask him. He knows exactly how to reach you through the noise. You and I have the same father. So if he was that way to me, he will be that way to you. The one thing I felt so strongly in all of that I learned so much about God was what a good father he is. Like if you think about it, a good father sees something terrible happening to their daughter and they go in and rescue her at all cost. So some people say God hates divorce and God doesn't want you to get divorced. He would never condone divorce. God will break rules. He will break his own. He doesn't care if it's a matter of saving his girl or his boy. He will do it at any cost. So just remember that. Do not put him in a box. My story is proof of that. So the song that inspired this episode today is called When the Soul Dies. If you want to, go check it out. It's on Spotify, all the platforms. If you want to know what I'm up to and my updates, go to alexmabey.com. It's spelled ALEXMABEY. And keep connected. I want to hear your thoughts, and I hope something in here resonated. So until next time, thanks for listening.
Sometimes the road ain't cold, it's a cold wind laughing. I woke up one day a prison bird, I wonder how that happened. But we were both trapped in fences that grew into towers. I would have stayed with you, my love, for millions of hours. But when the soul dies, so does the song. And when the song dies, so does the singer it's from. So I took our love down and let it go with the river. Looking back at stories of ages, we're all the same. Just travelers trying to find freedom, addicted to pain. Baby can't know anything you don't, and I'm done asking you to see what I do. I'm moving on. 'Cause when the soul dies, so does the song. And when the song dies, so does the singer it's from. So I took our love down and let it go with the river. Let it go with the river. Let it go with the river. When the soul dies, when all the colors fade, it'd be no good that way. Hey, hey, I love you enough to say that it's enough, that we try. It's in love I let you go. It's in grace that I walk home. It's in peace like a river. Go in peace on the river. Go in peace on the river. Part of me is in the river too.